Have you ever woken up one morning, looked in the mirror, and wondered, who am I now? For years, you were somebody's wife, somebody's partner, maybe even somebody's everything. And then one day it was gone. The love, the promises, the shared dreams, they slipped away, leaving only silence. That silence is where her story begins. She was 42. A mother. A woman who had once believed in forever. She thought she had built a life that would carry her through middle age and into her golden years. But life had other plans. Divorce papers sat on the kitchen counter like a final verdict, reminding her that the chapter she thought would last a lifetime was already closed. If you've ever been there, or even close, you know the feeling. The house feels too quiet. The bed feels too big. And the future, it feels like a question you're not ready to answer. People might tell you, it's just a new beginning, but in those early days, it doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like loss. She spent weeks just going through the motions, waking up, going to work, coming home, cooking dinner alone. Smiling when she needed to, crying when no one was watching. And every time she walked past the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom, sometimes it's the only place where you can finally hear your own voice. One evening, after another long day, she poured herself a glass of wine, sat on the porch, and stared at the fading sunset. She thought about everything she had lost, and then, almost by accident, she thought about what she still had. A body that still carried her. A mind full of curiosity. And somewhere buried under the pain, a spark of desire, the desire to live again on her own terms. That night, she whispered to herself, almost like a promise. This is not the end. This is where I begin. And with that single thought, a new journey was set in motion. She didn't know yet where it would take her, or who she would become along the way. But she knew one thing, she could no longer stay frozen in the life that had ended. She had to step out, even if it was scary, even if she had no map. This is the story of a woman who rebuilt herself, mile by mile, state by state, heart by heart. It's a story about courage, loneliness, laughter, and rediscovery. But most of all, it's a story about hope. Hope that no matter your age, your scars, or your past, there is still a wide, beautiful world waiting for you. And it all begins, right here. The night the papers were signed, she came home to a house that didn't feel like hers anymore. The pictures on the wall, family vacations, anniversaries, birthdays, suddenly felt like relics from someone else's life. She set her purse down on the counter, and for a moment, the sound echoed through the empty kitchen, louder than she expected. The silence was unbearable. She turned on the television just to drown it out, letting some random sitcom fill the space with laughter that didn't belong to her. But no matter how loud the background noise, the truth pressed in. Her marriage was over, and with it, the identity she had worn for almost 2 decades. When you've been someone's partner for so long, you forget what it means to stand alone. Every routine, every morning coffee, every late-night conversation, was shaped around someone else. And when that someone else is gone, you don't just lose a person. You lose the version of yourself that only existed in their presence. That night, she curled up in bed, hugging a pillow against her chest. She told herself she was fine, that she was strong. But when the clock struck midnight, the tears came. Not quiet tears, but the kind that shake your whole body. The kind that remind you that grief isn't only for death. It's for dreams, too. The weight of judgment. Divorce carries a stigma, especially for women in their 40s. At family gatherings, she felt the whispers. She couldn't keep her marriage together. At church, the sympathetic smiles felt like pity. Even at the grocery store, when she saw couples shopping together, she felt a pang of shame, as though everyone could see the invisible scarlet letter she carried. She wondered if people judged her more harshly because of her age. Society tells women that by 40, you should have it figured out: stable marriage, stable career, stable life. To stumble now, to start over, feels like breaking the rules. But life doesn't follow rules. Life unravels when you least expect it. The loneliness. Evenings were the hardest. She would come home from work, cook dinner for one, and sit at the table in silence. The chair across from her, once filled by her husband, now sat empty, mocking her. She tried leaving the TV on during dinner, but it only made her feel lonelier, like she was pretending there was company when there wasn't. She scrolled through social media, watching friends post pictures with their spouses, smiling at fancy restaurants or celebrating anniversaries. She wanted to be happy for them, but each post was a reminder of what she had lost. And late at night, when she lay in bed, her mind replayed memories she wished she could erase, arguments that turned into shouting matches, the moment he said, "I don't love you anymore," the look on his face when he walked out the door. The questions. Every morning, she woke up with the same questions. Who am I now? What comes next? Am I too old to start over? The questions looped endlessly, like a broken record. At 25, starting over might feel exciting. At 42, it feels terrifying. You're old enough to know how hard the world can be, and young enough to realize you still have decades ahead. It's a strange, uncomfortable middle ground. The spark. And yet, even in the darkest moments, a tiny spark refused to die. It showed up in small ways. The morning she caught herself humming while making coffee. The afternoon she stood in the yard and felt the sun warm her face. The evening she remembered how much she once loved to write in her journal. These weren't grand revelations. They were whispers. Gentle nudges. Reminders that life still had texture, still had color, even in the midst of grief. One night, after crying herself to sleep again, she woke up suddenly at 3 a.m. She walked to the bathroom, splashed water on her face, and looked in the mirror. For the first time in months, she really looked. Her eyes were swollen, her hair messy, but beneath it all, she saw something unexpected: resilience. She saw a woman who had survived heartbreak, disappointment, and judgment. A woman who was still standing, even when she thought she couldn't. And in that moment she realized, if I can survive this, maybe I can survive anything. The turning point. It didn't happen all at once. Healing never does. But from that night on, something shifted. She stopped thinking of herself as broken, and started asking, what do I want now? She didn't have the answers yet, but the question itself was powerful. It cracked the door open to possibility. She didn't know that soon she would step through that door, onto a road that would take her across the country, into the unknown, and ultimately, back to herself. The idea came quietly, almost like a whisper she wasn't sure she could trust. One Saturday morning, while folding laundry, she found herself staring at an old travel magazine tucked under a pile of books. The cover was faded, but the headline still shouted in bold letters, "Discover the beauty in your own backyard." On the front was a photograph of the ocean, deep blue waves crashing against a golden shore. She remembered that years ago, she had circled that very article and told her husband, someday we should go there. Of course, someday never came. Life had been too busy: kids, work, bills, responsibilities. Now, staring at that magazine, she wondered, what if someday could still happen, even if it's just me? Her first reaction was fear. The idea of going somewhere alone felt daunting. Would people stare? Would she feel out of place? Could she even do it? But alongside the fear, there was something else, a pulse of excitement. For the first time in months, she felt curious about the future instead of dreading it. The decision. That night, she sat at her computer and searched for a beach town within driving distance. After scrolling through endless options, she finally clicked book on a modest hotel by the ocean. Her hands trembled as she entered her credit card information. It wasn't a trip around the world. It wasn't glamorous. But it was hers. When the confirmation email hit her inbox, she sat back in her chair, heart pounding. For the first time since her divorce, she had made a decision that was purely for herself. The road. On the morning of the trip, she packed a small suitcase, just enough clothes for 3 days, a book she'd been meaning to read, and her old journal. As she slid into the driver's seat, nerves knotted her stomach. She almost talked herself out of it. She thought of excuses: it's too far. I should save money. What if I get lonely? But then she remembered that night in the mirror, when she had seen resilience in her reflection. With a deep breath, she turned the key, and the car came alive. The highway stretched out before her, long and endless. As the miles rolled by, she turned up the radio and sang along to songs she hadn't listened to in years. Some made her laugh. Some made her cry. But with every passing exit, the weight on her chest grew a little lighter. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was moving forward, not just on the road, but in her life. The arrival. When she arrived at the hotel, her nerves returned. She watched couples checking in together, families wrangling kids, groups of friends laughing. She stood there with her single suitcase, suddenly hyper-aware of her aloneness. The receptionist smiled warmly. "Just you?" she asked. Her cheeks flushed, but she managed a small smile. "Yes. Just me." It felt strange to say it out loud, but also strangely empowering. She carried her bag to the room, opened the curtains, and there it was, the ocean. Vast, powerful, infinite. She stood at the window for a long time, letting the sound of the waves seep into her bones. The first dinner alone. That evening, she walked into a small seafood restaurant by the pier. The hostess asked how many, and she answered, "Just one." The words caught in her throat. She had never eaten out alone before, not really. The thought of sitting at a table, surrounded by couples and families, made her stomach twist. But she forced herself to stay. As the waitress handed her a menu, she noticed a couple across the room holding hands. For a moment, grief rose in her chest. She thought about how she used to sit across from someone she loved. She almost wanted to run out the door. But then the waitress brought her a plate of grilled salmon and a glass of white wine. She took a bite, and to her surprise, it was delicious. She looked out the window at the pier, lights reflecting on the water, and thought, maybe this isn't so bad. She pulled out her journal, opened it, and began to write. Words poured out of her, feelings she had been carrying for months. By the time she finished, she realized she wasn't lonely anymore. She was keeping herself company. The ocean. The next morning, she woke up early and walked barefoot along the shore. The sand was cool beneath her feet, and the sunrise painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Standing there, with the wind in her hair and the waves rushing over her toes, she felt something break open inside. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since her marriage ended, she cried tears that weren't just for loss. They were for release. She whispered to herself, "I'm still here. I'm still me." In that moment, the ocean became more than water. It became a mirror. A reminder that she was vast, powerful, and capable of renewal. The return. By the end of the trip, something had shifted. She wasn't healed. She wasn't suddenly free of grief. But she had proof that she could do something hard, something scary, and not only survive, but grow from it. When she packed up and drove home, she carried more than a suitcase. She carried a sense of possibility. The house was still quiet when she returned. The bed was still too big. But she was different. And she knew deep down that this was only the beginning. The first step had been taken. And soon it would lead her across America, state by state, mile by mile, into a life she never imagined. The road beckons. The first trip had planted a seed. Back at home, the quiet house didn't feel quite as suffocating anymore. But it also didn't feel enough. She realized that her taste of freedom on that ocean shore had unlocked something, curiosity. One evening, she opened her laptop and typed into the search bar, "Best road trips in America for solo travelers." Lists popped up, filled with winding routes, national parks, and cities bursting with music and culture. As she scrolled, her heart raced. For years, travel had been a dream she put on hold, always waiting for the right time, the right partner, the right circumstances. But now she thought, why not me? Why not now? With that, she packed her bags again. This time, it wasn't for a weekend. It was for something bigger. She didn't have a set plan. Just a car, a camera, her journal, and the determination to keep moving forward. Stop 1, Arizona, the Grand Canyon. Days later, she stood at the edge of the Grand Canyon, wind whipping her hair as she gazed into the vast expanse. The colors shifted with the sun, rusty reds, deep purples, streaks of gold. It was bigger than anything she had ever seen, bigger than her grief, bigger than her fears. She whispered, "I thought my life was over. But compared to this canyon, my pain feels small." A man nearby overheard her. He was older, with a weathered face and kind eyes. "That's the thing about the canyon," he said. "It makes you realize how temporary our troubles are. Nature's been here for millions of years. We're just passing through." She smiled, grateful for the reminder. In her journal, she wrote, "Lesson 1, I am not my past. My pain is real, but it doesn't define the whole of me." Stop 2, New Orleans, finding rhythm again. From Arizona, she drove east, chasing music. She arrived in New Orleans on a humid evening, streets alive with jazz spilling out of every doorway. Lanterns glowed, people danced in the street, and laughter floated in the air like a song. At first, she lingered on the edge of the crowd, self-conscious. But soon, a group of women waved her over. They were strangers, other travelers, some divorced, some widowed, some just tired of waiting for life to happen. They danced together, barefoot on the cobblestones, not caring who watched. She laughed so hard her stomach hurt. For the first time in years, she felt joy without conditions. One of the women, a fiery redhead named Lila, leaned close and shouted over the music, "Honey, life doesn't stop because a man walks out the door. Sometimes, that's when it really begins." She carried those words with her. Lesson 2, joy is something you can choose. And sometimes, strangers become your teachers. Stop 3, Montana, the wide open sky. Weeks later, she found herself driving through Montana. Rolling fields stretched endlessly, and the sky seemed to go on forever. She pulled over at a quiet spot, stepped out, and just stood there. The silence was profound, but not lonely, peaceful. As she watched the sunset bleed across the horizon, she realized something. She didn't feel the ache of emptiness anymore. She felt space. Space to breathe. Space to grow. That night, she stayed in a small inn run by a widow in her 60s. Over tea, the woman shared her own story, how she had lost her husband decades ago but had built a life full of travel, books, and friendships. "You don't move on," the innkeeper said softly. "You move forward. And sometimes, forward takes you to places you never imagined." In her journal, she wrote, "Lesson 3, healing isn't about forgetting. It's about making room for something new." Encounters on the road. Her journey wasn't just about landscapes. It was about the people she met. A young waitress in Texas who dreamed of leaving her small town to see the world. An elderly couple in South Carolina who told her that their secret to 50 years of marriage was forgiveness and separate bathrooms. A fellow solo traveler in Colorado who admitted, "I was terrified to do this alone. But being here reminds me I'm stronger than I thought." Each conversation left an imprint. Each reminded her that life was full of stories, some painful, some beautiful, all worth living. The journal becomes a channel. Along the way, she began recording short videos of her travels. At first, it was just for herself, a way to document the journey. But one evening, sitting in a motel room, she uploaded a clip to YouTube, her standing on a cliff in Arizona, saying, "I thought my life was over at 42. But today, I feel alive again." She didn't expect anyone to watch. But within days, comments poured in. Women from all over wrote, "Thank you. I'm 45 and just divorced. I needed this. I've been too scared to travel alone. You gave me courage. Your story feels like my story." Suddenly, her journey wasn't just hers anymore. It was a bridge, connecting women across the country, across the world. The transformation within. By the time she had crossed her 10th state, she noticed the shift. Her laughter came more easily. Her shoulders no longer carried the same weight. Yes, there were still hard days, moments of loneliness, moments of doubt. But she learned to sit with them, knowing they would pass. She realized that healing wasn't a destination. It was a road. A road she was walking, mile by mile, with courage. And perhaps the most important discovery of all, she wasn't running from her past anymore. She was running toward her future. The turning point of the journey. One night, parked under a blanket of stars in Utah, she lay back on the hood of her car and whispered, "I didn't just travel across America. I traveled back to myself." Her journal, once filled with sorrow, was now filled with gratitude. Gratitude for the pain that pushed her forward. Gratitude for the strangers who reminded her she wasn't alone. Gratitude for the chance to start over, even at 42. The channel grows. What started as a simple journal and a few shaky videos uploaded from cheap motels began to bloom into something much larger. At first, just a handful of people watched her clips, friends, maybe a stranger who stumbled upon her story. But slowly, the numbers grew. 100 views turned into 1,000. 1,000 turned into 10,000. Comments flooded in. "I'm 48 and I thought it was too late for me. You showed me otherwise. Watching you travel alone gave me courage to book my first solo trip. Please keep sharing your journey, you have no idea how much hope it gives me." She never set out to be an influencer. She never set out to build an audience. But her honesty, her vulnerability, her willingness to show both the laughter and the tears, that's what drew people in. And for the first time, she realized that her story, once a source of shame, had become a source of power. Letters from strangers. One evening, she opened her email to find a message from a woman in Michigan. It read, "I just want to say thank you. I've been divorced for 3 years and I thought I'd never find joy again. Last week, after watching your video, I finally took a weekend trip alone. I sat by the lake, just me and the sky, and I felt alive for the first time in years." She cried as she read it. Not tears of sadness, but tears of recognition. This wasn't just about her anymore. Her journey was becoming part of a larger story, a story of resilience shared by women everywhere. A new identity. She used to introduce herself as a divorced mom. That label once felt like a scarlet letter. But now when people asked who she was, she smiled and said, "I'm a traveler. A storyteller. A woman rediscovering herself." It wasn't about erasing her past, it was about expanding beyond it. Her children noticed the change too. They saw their mother not as broken, but as brave. They cheered her on, sometimes even joining her on short trips. And in that, she realized she wasn't just healing herself, she was showing her kids what strength looks like. The hard days still come. Of course, not every day was easy. There were still nights when loneliness crept back in. There were moments when the silence of a hotel room felt heavier than the silence of her old house. But now she had tools. She had the journal, the camera, the community of women online cheering her on. Instead of sinking into despair, she reached out, she created, she kept moving. Healing wasn't about pretending the pain was gone. It was about learning to live alongside it, without letting it control her. Standing on a stage. Months later, she was invited to speak at a women's conference. She stood on a stage, lights shining down, looking out at hundreds of faces, women of all ages, many with tears in their eyes. Her voice trembled at first, but then she found her rhythm. "I thought divorce was the end of me," she told them. "But it was only the end of a chapter. Not the book. The truth is, divorce didn't break me. It set me free. And I want you to know, whatever you've lost, whatever you fear, it's never too late to begin again." The room erupted in applause. Women hugged each other. Some lined up afterward just to say thank you, or to whisper, "Your story is my story." Looking back, moving forward. One quiet evening, months after that conference, she sat again by the ocean, the same place where her first solo trip had begun. She opened her journal and flipped through the pages. In the beginning, the entries were soaked with grief, questions, doubts, tears. But as the pages turned, the words shifted. Laughter appeared between the lines. Gratitude filled the margins. She closed the book and placed it on her lap. Staring at the horizon, she whispered to herself, "I didn't just travel across states. I traveled back to myself." A message to every woman over 40. Her story is not just hers. It belongs to every woman who has stood at the edge of heartbreak and thought, "It's over." Because here's the truth, it's not over. At 40, at 50, at 60, you are not done. You are not broken. You are becoming. Maybe for you, it won't be a cross-country trip. Maybe it's picking up a paintbrush again, or signing up for that dance class, or finally writing the book you've always dreamed of. Whatever it is, the first step is always the hardest. But once you take it, the road opens. And on that road, you may just find yourself. The final reflection. She smiled at the waves, remembering the woman who once cried into her wine glass, convinced life had ended. That woman was gone, not erased, but transformed. Now she knew, divorce wasn't the end of her story. It was the doorway to a life she never thought possible. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, she whispered one last time, "This is not the end. This is where I begin." And so, her story comes full circle. She began as a woman broken by loss, sitting in silence with nothing but questions. But along the miles of open road, in the laughter of strangers, in the rhythm of music, and in the quiet strength of her own heart, she found an answer. Life after divorce is not an ending. It is a doorway. She learned that the courage to take one small step, to book a ticket, to drive into the unknown, to eat dinner alone, can lead to a journey of rediscovery more powerful than she ever imagined. At 42, she thought her story was finished. Instead, It had only just begun. So to every woman listening, especially those over 40, this is her message. You are not too old. You are not too late. You are not broken. You are becoming. And as the sun sets on her journey, she leaves us with the words that carried her from heartbreak to hope. This is not the end. This is where I begin.